At 197 pounds, we got the final match of Bo Nickal's collegiate career in the finals against Colin Moore. Nickal was very down against Moore this season. He had a pin in the dual meet against Ohio State. I believe he had a major decision in the Big Ten finals. And then in this match, actually did not get bonus points surprisingly, but this match was never in doubt. He was pretty dominant performance from him. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the highlights, just the two takedowns he had. Then I'll show the bracket, talk about all the matches that happened at 197, and then do the same for 285. So here's his first takedown against Colin Moore. So shoots in on a single, switches off to the double, gets him at the hip. Moore does a good job in defending, but Nickal is just going side to side, constantly pushing in every direction until he finally takes him forward and gets the takedown, and is also able to get the ride out here for the rest of the round, or the rest of the period. So good start for Bo Nickal. The only point that he ever gave up in this match was an escape. The end score ended up being 5-1. The other takedown he got was later on, sort of like a weird cradle takedown. Let me see if I can find that one for you. It's towards the end of the third round. Yeah, so sort of around this area. There's probably about like 20 seconds more that goes into it. But for Bo Nickal, surprisingly, I think in large part because of the fact he didn't get any bonus points on Colin Moore here, he didn't win the Outstanding Wrestler for the tournament. That went to 165-pound winner from Virginia Tech, Mekhi Lewis. But Nickal, either way, I think at this point, especially with the match with Hiley being so close for Nolf, Nickal probably locked up the Hodge in that regard, even though this wasn't the most dominant one for him. But here he gets another 2 points. So he locks up the cradle there. He's got his hands locked, gets his 2 points, and gets the 5-1 win. But let's go through the rest of the bracket. And in this bracket, really, it was pretty much Bo Nickal's going to win, but let's see who can earn some team points here. So Nickal got a fall over Hockett, who surprisingly was a All-American for Fresno State, which is a fairly new program. I guess they used to have a program, but they came back recently. But in the quarterfinals, he won over Traxler 14-4. Pat Bruckey beat Lane, who had an upset over Jacob Warner the previous round by a score of 4-2. Surprisingly, Lane, though, wasn't able to wrestle his way back into All-American status. But Bruckey beat him 4-3. Preston Weigel beat Brunner by a pin in the quarterfinals, and then Colin Moore over Tom Slay 17-11. In the semifinals, Nickal over Bruckey by pin, and then Weigel, who I think some people thought would be a little bit better. Now, granted, with him, he was coming back from injury, and I don't think he was 100% in this tournament, even though he had some pretty good results. But he just got run over by Colin Moore, who a lot of people, and definitely myself included, it's hard to forget what happened last year with Kyle Cannell, thinking that this could potentially happen to Colin Moore again, where he could get upset by someone who you don't expect. I actually picked Jacob Woodley to be that guy. Way off on that pick. Woodley lost by a score of 14-4 and didn't even make it to the All-American stand. But anyway, Colin Moore gets to the final, has a closer match with Bo Nickal, but wasn't really ever close to winning the match. So for the final, or for the top 8 here, we have Bo Nickal number 1, Colin Moore number 2, Preston Weigel number 3, Pat Bruckey number 4, Josh Hockett from Fresno State, surprisingly working his way up to number 5. Willie Miklas in his senior year, a bit of a bittersweet year for him with his father passing away, but that's part of the reason why he went from Missouri and transferred back to Iowa State to be closer to home. Jacob Warner, number 7, and then Ben Honus from Cornell, number 8. I'll go through the bracket at 285 first, and then go to the highlights of the finals between Cassar and White. So let's get that pulled up. This was one where I picked Gable Stevenson to win it all. Definitely have some issues with how his match went down with Cassar, but I'll get to it once we get to that point in the bracket. But one of the most notable parts here is that with Gunning of Buffalo being taken out, instead of Sam Stoll facing Wood in the first round, he ends up facing him in the quarterfinals. And to get to the quarterfinals, he had to beat Mason Paris and then Conan Jennings. Paris he hadn't faced before, but Jennings he had beaten in the duel back in January. So Stoll makes it to the quarterfinals. The other quarterfinal matches were Derek White, who defeated Stencil of Central Michigan, or Matt Stencil of Central Michigan. Sam Stoll fell to Jordan Wood. Gable Stevenson with a major decision over Mar Desi, and then Anthony Cassar with a 4-0 win over Trent Hilger. In the semifinals, Derek White won 3-1 over Jordan Wood. Gable Stevenson fell 4-3 to Anthony Cassar, and one of those points was a riding time point. This was a match that was one takedown apiece, and the riding time point was an issue because it looked as though Gable had gotten away with about 56 seconds of riding time or so. but they never really called it until about 1 minute and 2 seconds. So Minnesota throws in the break, throws in the challenge, and for whatever reason, they win the challenge and that 102 wasn't the correct riding time, but instead they decided it was 101. But you can definitely see, and there were some screen captures there where Gable was definitely out before then. He was out probably around like the 56, 57-second mark. So had they scored that, or had they called it correctly, there is no extra point for riding time. This match is 3-3, goes to overtime, and I mean, you never know. Gable was looking like he was getting tired. So if I had to like do like a live bet on who I thought was going to get a takedown if it went to overtime, I think Cassar probably would get the edge there. But you got to at least give him the chance to do it, especially if he earned the escape in time before the minute had elapsed. But with that being said, Cassar ends up getting by him 4-3 again, just like the score at the Big Ten tournament. So he goes up against Derek White and then wins by a score of 10-1, which is largely on a late takedown in the second round. First round wasn't a whole lot of action, but the second round is where it really was won. So let me see if we can find that for you here. Yeah, so match was pretty much lost at that point. Yeah, so it's a little bit later in here. ESPN Plus or the ESPN thing could definitely be a lot easier to work with, but what do you do? Yeah, so this was the situation here. So Derek White got a quick escape, 12 seconds left in the period, and Cassar is going to shoot for a light takedown, get it, but then also get some back points on it. So shoots it on the single, and then pulls on White's leg so that White almost kind of has to like give up his back here. You'd like to see White be able to kind of turn and not give up any back points. But it was kind of hard to tell how much of it was on Derek White for making a mistake and how much of it was on Cassar for kind of forcing him into that mistake. But either way, getting up 6-1 here definitely opened up the match for him. And from there, White just had to kind of shoot him with reckless abandon, and that didn't work out well for him. It ends up being a 10-1 win for Anthony Cassar, who gets a major decision win at heavyweight after last year where he didn't even qualify. And this is one of the things I have a much bigger issue with this as far as the Olympics go than I do with college. But sort of an unfortunate situation that happened last year where Shakur Rashid, who ends up not placing at 184 this year, but Shakur Rashid wins the spot from Cassar last year. So Cassar, as a 197-pounder, not even wrestling in the tournament. This year, he beats out a guy, Nick Nevels, who was like a top 4 guy at heavyweight. So now Nevels doesn't even get to wrestle this year, but Cassar does at heavyweight. And after earning that spot, ends up having a fantastic year. Just has one loss to Derek White earlier in the season at the Southern Scuffle, but ends up avenging that here big time and wins a national title after not even being in the tournament last year, down a weight. So great job for Anthony Cassar. Great way for him to end his college career. It'll be interesting to see who Penn State puts out at heavyweight next year. And either way, it'll also be interesting to see how Gable Stevenson responds and how much better he's able to get in the next 12 months and what we see from him next time around. Because he was pretty close to making it this year. You could argue he got screwed a little bit, but either way, what do you do? That's not the only guy who seemed to get screwed against the Penn State guy. Hayden Hiley can also make a similar case against Jason Nolf, but that's not me saying that there's some kind of conspiracy that's working in Penn State's favor. I think it's more just refs don't want to reverse calls after they make them, and if that's the call that's made on the mat, they just, since the ref who makes the call on the mat is also the ref who's reviewing it, I think a lot of times they just want to go with what they called. So not much you can do about it, but good job for Anthony Cassar to win his first title in his senior year. Good job for Bo Nickal to win another title for him. I believe that's his third. Also hitting in his senior year. It'll be interesting to see how the teams look next year. Penn State's going to be losing a couple of their top guys. Iowa's going to be keeping pretty much everyone and getting Michael Kemmerer back. Oklahoma State should be pretty strong still, although they'll lose a couple good guys. So can't wait until next season. Freestyle season's going to get going now, and I'll put out a couple of videos on that, especially one on how wrestling decides to treat this like a dual meet where they have a varsity team for every country, and whether or not I think that's a good idea that you only get one guy from every country.